Welcome to Iron and Ceramite, Librarius Omnis, where we explore the depths of the Black Library.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Iron and Ceramite, presents Librarius Omnis. Obviously, this is our series where we go through the books of the Horus Heresy. You join us midway through book number 9, Mechanicum. We've already covered part 1, which took us 3 parts. So go and have a look at those first 3 videos if this is your first entry into our discussion of the books. Today we're going to look at the first part of part 2, because we do like to go into our detail, discuss the themes and what's happening. You join us obviously as we get into the second part. At the end of the first part, lots and lots has happened, but the main narrative beat that we pick up on is the growing tension between the Night Houses, the Legio Tempestus and Legio Mortis, as Legio Mortis have set their engines to walk. Mortis walks towards the Tempest Line, it is Tempest Line, an old line drawn in the Martian territories that each Night House commanded, and obviously you're not supposed to breaking that line is effectively declaring war. And while that's happening, as they march towards it, the Stormlord of Legio Tempestus, Cavallero, is pushing his engine, his Titan, to breaking point by trying to get there as quickly as possible and demanding that his knights do not fire. And obviously that is, we'll come into that a little bit, because at the start of this part is very much about that potential conflict and the outcome of that, but that's where we left it at the end. We were obviously introduced, and we had plenty of other characters involved, including probably our main protagonist, Dalia, and her attempts to create this machine, the Akashic reader for Coriol Zeth, the Adept of the Magma City, and their successes and failures in terms of that regard. And that was one of the main narrative beats as we drew close to the end of draw to the close of end of part 1. Though it's much more about the Titans, and that's really where we pick it up now. I think that's about it, John. I think before we dive in, is that?
I think you've covered it, yeah. And if you haven't, they've all seen the other parts, hopefully. So
and go back and have a look.
Yeah, they don't need to know it's been like a month and a half.
No, we did it just the other day.
Yeah. So shall we dive in? Obviously, we've got our map that we've had. You've had time to look at that, and then if you've got the book, you can obviously join in with us. And we'll jump into part 2, System A Mechanicum. And as always, we have our cheat sheet of characters. Although you picked up before, one of them's wrong, isn't it? Someone's on here twice. I've already forgotten who. I was going to write over it. I tell you who it is. It's the Tempestus one at the top on the right. They put Camillus on there.
Oh, that was it. Yeah. They got it wrong, didn't they? Legio Tempestus is in there twice, but it's not.
Yeah. But anyway, let's dive in and pick up where we left off, shall we?
Yes.
Chapter 2.01, and the Tempest Line has been crossed. Shockingly, Legio Mortis have purposely walked all the way from their fortress across all the mutual no man's land and into the territory of Legio Tempestus, and they've only done it with a host of fully armored Titans. And although he's looking right at it, Cavallero can't believe his eyes. So, to say that they're supporting Horus Lupercal in order to goad the legions is one thing, but the fact that Princess Camillus has actually come out of his way to provoke a war is almost like unimaginable. The Adepts of Mars are known to war and fight over bits of land and like perceived slights of honor, but the Titan legions or legios are above this, and they're supposed to represent a united front of Mars linked to Terra. And be above petty squabbles from the Mechanicum. But just to confirm their intentions, the massive Imperator Titan takes another step and puts it completely across the Tempest Line, cementing their intention. And then starting a war at this moment in time would ensure Tempestus would be destroyed. Mortis wouldn't go unscathed, but there's no way they'd be able to contend with this new monster. The other princeps are now demanding to know from Cavallero to be given the order to fire.
Yeah.
His warhounds are moving to intercept, and he's had to give the order to stand fast while he has to rightly consider his options. Raptoria is straining itself against its commander, Princess Kazim. It's like a feral beast, bloodthirsty and a cold-blooded killing machine, and Kazim's holding it in check, although it's desperate to open fire on this enemy, and he's having to physically override the systems so it doesn't go off on its own, which just seems mental that they've got these things that
the machine spirit is not happy. It wants to taste blood. It's very very up for the fight. I think at one point, doesn't he? Or maybe it's this point. I know he flicks over and sort of says all firing solutions need to be given over to him to try and sate the machine spirit and let it know that there is a chance that it's going to get to have a bit of a fight.
Yeah, I mean they were the next words to come out of my mouth. So
okay, there we go.
And yeah, but as well as the machine, he actually does want something to happen.
Yeah,
he knows that it's going to be suicidal, but I mean they're in these machines for a reason.
Warhounds are as nature, by their nature, according to everything we've read so far in the book, and all of their knights that command them are hot-headed. That's they are they're the shock troops, as it were. They haven't graduated into the bigger mechs yet, so they are keen to get stuck in, even if it does mean they're going to kill themselves doing it.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's go big, get promoted into a bigger machine, or go out in a fiery ball of glory. So all these Titan and crews are standing by, but they can all see after the forced march that Cavallero's Victorix Magna is struggling, and Sharik, the other princeps, is watching, hoping out that their commander will be able to survive this battle, because they're going to need everybody when it kicks off. And not only do we have all these Titans, but hovering around at their feet are the Skitarii warriors, and they're obviously just going to get smushed. But they've marched out with their legion to face this enemy, and although they're obviously they're just no match for these Titans, Sharak is actually quite glad they're there, because he couldn't deny them the opportunity to come out and fight, because obviously they're another proud warrior race who need to get their licks in, even if it's suicidal.
Yeah, indeed.
And then suddenly, while they're on edge, the Vox spits out some unbearably loud scrap code, deafening everybody briefly, and they've had to shut off their Vox, but that hasn't helped, because the noise is coming out from the Titans' external speakers just as loudly, and still disrupting everyone. And Sharak can feel these dirty code lines worming their way through his machine, and he's having to physically fight, because he's connected to it, to keep it from actually corrupting his tech. But while they're distracted with that, suddenly the Mortis change their course of action and walk along the Tempestus line towards the eastern skirts of their homeland, the Ascraeus Mons. So Sharak orders his sensory operator to put an intercept course in, and gets no reply. And he looks over and sees that this guy slumped over in his chair. His eyes are rolled back, and he basically is just drooling. He's brain dead, and can see the scrap code's got in and basically killed this guy. So he orders that this guy gets disengaged. Some other officers run over and unplug him and just sort of dump him on the floor, as he convulses, as out of all the I don't know what they're called, the plug sockets, I guess, his lubricant, and his brain peels out.
Basically just, all leaks out. It's no fun. It's grim dark. The far-flung future, it's no fun. There's no if you can't do your job, that's it. You just get pulled out and slopped down until you can be dealt with later.
It just reminds me of the Matrix when
all pulling all of the
chairs.
Stuff like the big old data spike in the back of the neck.
It's and they can see it coming, can't they? And like, no,
it's pretty rough stuff for anyone commanding one of these war machines.
It's all fun and games till saying it's spiked in the back of the head.
Yes, that well known phrase.
Anyway, so Sharrock brings up the map in his mind, and even this is now sort of infected, as it normally he'd be able to plot a course, but it's all obviously distorted. So he does the best he can, and they try and head in the right direction, which these guys are heading in the direction of the Fabricator Locum's Forge. So he plots his course and sends a message to the other Titans, ordering them to lower their weapons. The enemy's moving away, and for the time being, they can take a breath, realizing how close they were to starting this war. But he orders the Warhounds Raptor and Vulpus Rex to follow Mortis to ensure that they leave and don't do anything else. But as he relaxes, a sense of dread emerges as he realizes he's given his orders, but he hasn't actually heard anything from the Stormlord. And he looks out. As the dread rises, he sees a pool of black fluid pooling at the base of the Titan. And even worse, Victorious Magna stood with its head bowed and its arms slacked against itself. Screaming out to his commander, he gets no response because the Victorious Magna is dead. And as you said before, Titan death.
Rough stuff. It's not good for the Titan, not good for the driver. Or any the Princeps or any of the crew that are plugged in any way because of the what do they call it, cerebral feedback or whatever it is. So no fun at all.
No. So thousands of kilometers away on the edge of the wastelands. Oh, I forgot about this guy. I like this bit.
The prospector.
Yeah,
I forgot about him as well. Yeah.
So in the wastelands of the I'm not going to pronounce it. Some wastelands. There's a hardened scavenger named Quinix, trying to make a living traveling in his old Cargo 5 bulk hauler, which is just an old piece of junk, barely holding itself together. This guy is an ex-Skitarii warrior who'd since let his body go, who'd been let go. But I'll start that again. He's an ex-Skitarii warrior. He'd been basically fired because his body rejected all the necessary implants. So now he just scourges the wastelands, hoping to find any sort of scraps of worth to make some money. Earlier, he picked up a signal stronger than one he'd found in decades out in the middle of nowhere and was making his way towards it, hoping that no other scavengers had detected it yet. He was right on top of it, but he could barely see out of his rusty old windscreen, and his auspex were playing up, so he wasn't getting a very good read on it, but he knew he was in the right area. So he parked up, picked up his las carbine, and he sets out into the elements. Outside, there's nothing obvious other than a large sand dune where the signal source seemed to be the strongest. Assuming that there's probably some sort of abandoned tanker of some kind buried under the mound, and probably the crew had abandoned it and tried to bury it before they could come back and recover it later. But all he knew is that he was about to make a tidy profit. So he puts his shovel to work and digs until he hits metal. That sweet sound, and he wipes away the sand as best as he can and sees that the metal is fresh and free of rust, but there were some blackened areas on it as if it had been hit with some intense heat. As far as he could tell, it was only superficial damage, so he kept clearing away and begins to reveal a large domed object, almost like a battle bot. And suddenly, another strong signal pinged, and as he looks around, a bright beam of light and the roar of engines takes over his senses. And almost as suddenly as the noise and light stopped, he sees a group of figures marching towards him from the heavy carrier craft which had landed nearby. As they approached, he yelled out, "This is mine. I found it and I have salvage rights." And a voice answered him and said, "Actually, you don't. That machine belongs to me." Quinix felt his heart sink as the voice came into view, surrounded by heavily armored Skitarii warriors. It was an adept of the Mechanicum who stepped forward wearing thick red robes and an iron mask with glowing red eyes, and a huge device slung over his shoulders. "Who the hell are you?" he demands, and the answer is, "I am Adept Lucas Crom." "Never heard of you," he says. And Crom says, "Look, come, I'm here to take you back to Mondus Gamma." And Quinix tells him, "I ain't going nowhere, you." And Crom says, "Well, I wasn't talking to you. I was talking to the Caban." And with that, the sand beneath Quinix trembled as the machine he was standing on came shaking into life as it powered up. Quinix lost his balance and began to fall, sliding down the side of it until he fell and hit the ground below. This machine stood 10 meters tall, a roughly spherical body with two heavy weaponized arms by its side. And after a moment, it trained its weapons on Quinix's crawler and fired, the explosion sending Quinix flying to the ground. The blast forced the rebreather off of his face, and he's laying like in the elements now, gasping for air, breathing in poison fumes of Mars, and can feel his lungs being eaten away inside, scrambling and trying to put it back on, coughing up bloody mucus all over himself. The machine begins to move, and he begs as the Caban machine rolls towards him, and blood poured from his mouth as his pleas were ignored as the Caban machine rolled over him, grinding him into the soil. I mean, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, it started off, well, the way I described it, it started off as a real, like a scene out of Star Wars, and like that's what it reminds me of, like some sort of, Jawa or like Rey from the beginning of the new ones, like bouncing around the desert, finding scrap. Very, very, almost wholesome to a degree. It doesn't end that way.
No,
so, yeah. Unfortunately, that's the way it went for poor old Quinix.
Yeah, it was a good little character for the 2 minutes he lasted.
It's easy kill for the author.
Yeah, perfect. So while that's going on elsewhere, we go back to Kelbo Howe and Regulus. So the power that had been released from the vaults of Morovax was nothing like he had ever known. Not only his own insight and knowledge, but there's physical entities within as well. And they stand and watch as a parade of augmented Praetorian battle servitors march out. All manners of shapes and sizes, some on tracks, others on wheels, and some on legs, coming out and filling the engine hangars around him. It's a great moment that only he and Regulus were there to witness, but this would change when he unleashed these new war machines of the Dark Mechanicum. The weaponized servitors were huge muscular beasts in blackened armor and converted in like barbed spikes and wore fright masks as they spewed nonsense from their Vox units. And those without mouths emitted the scrap code from an internal Vox, corrupting anything nearby. Regulus looked overjoyed and said that the power of the warp and the Mechanicum are allied together in a glorious fusion. And Kelbor Howe accepted the compliment, ignoring the fact that Crom had done most of the real work to get there. The services are just the beginning. We will now upgrade our Skitarii next, and the scrap code is already pouring through the flood stream all over Olympus Mons and is beginning to spread across Mars. And basically now this is the start of absolute pandemonium on the planet.
The schism. War comes to Mars.
Yeah.
And very much is the start of the schism and Kelbor Howe's rapid fall to chaos.
Yeah, and that's it. He's already he's opened this vault and instantly it's now the Dark Mechanicum. Instantly he's changed it, and he's not even hiding it. Like, you call yourself the Dark Mechanicum, you're not a good guy. Not that there's good guys.
Yeah, it is that moment where you got to stop and ask yourself that question. Are we the bad guys? Like, because as I said, you don't call yourself the Dark Mechanicum. Like, that's not it's not the way to do it.
No.
But don't. Well, I mean, when did they call themselves the Dark Mechanicum?
Well, I mean, that's the first time it's been mentioned. Like when the new Praetorians come out, that's the first time it said his new warriors of the Dark Mechanicum. I think he officially announces it a bit later. But yeah, that's
if that's what he's
decided, doesn't he?
If that's what you're deciding to call yourself, that's bad news.
Yeah, you think they'd come up with something a bit more creative, just so it wasn't so obvious.
Hearts and minds, right? Hearts and minds. You're not gonna win over anyone that's on the fence by calling yourself the Dark Mechanicum.
Oh, exactly. We're just a bit emo, that's all.
Yeah. No, it's fine. No, we're well intentioned. There's no chaos here.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, how does it work? So, virtually like every port, any connecting point on Mars is linked together. Like this is how they work. Information shared across the planet. Everyone's connected. Everybody knows everything instantly. Everybody is connected, no matter where you are. And somehow the warp's code will eventually touch every forge and undertake its great changes wherever it can reach.
Yep.
Regulus warns him that there will be resistance. Not everyone will be overrun so easily. Like the forges within the Magma Cities are already providing difficult, especially those of Maximal and Kane. And as they expected, Adept Zeth had been pioneering this new form of noospheric data transfer, and her allies had already modified themselves to rely on this.
Yeah.
Regulus is unfamiliar with the term, but Kelbord tells him not to worry. He sent Melgator to see Zeth to sequester her data and determine her loyalties. So the new sphere is basically Wi-Fi. The Mechanicum runs on landline, but Zeth has created Wi-Fi.
That's pretty much it. That's exactly it. It's all in the air because it's not plugged in. It's not getting the virus that's effectively scrap code. It's a virus in nature in terms of how it infects and gets through the entire system. Killing or turning. Yeah. Whereas because they're all on the Wi-Fi, they're okay.
Yeah. So Melgator's going to visit her in person, and Regulus Hiss says that he already knows that she's an enemy of the War Master. And he has reason to suspect this, as when the vault of Moravak had opened, the sky above Olympus Mons had blackened and raged, releasing freakish weather patterns that had echoed every corner of Mars, except hers.
Mm-hmm.
The exact time that the skies had blackened, a bright light had emitted from Zeth's forge. Not knowing what they had seen, Kelbor Howard asked, was it an accident or a weapon? And Regulus had simply replied, "It is an enemy revealed."
Yeah, a bit vague. Like he could have been a bit more specific. Enemy revealed. Yeah, fine. She's potentially an enemy. But like, I couldn't get from this whether he actually knew what it was, or whether he just knew it was potentially using like the Astronomicon, or what was happening there. It's a bit vague in his description, other than he thinks that they're not on the same side.
No, that's it, isn't it? I think it's to the point where everything's so planned, especially on Regulus, like beyond anybody, he knows what's going on.
Yeah.
And that wasn't planned. So clearly that's not what we wanted to happen. That's an enemy. And he might just want to be, and he can say an enemy's revealed, I'll tell you more later. And then he'll sneak off and start doing some research and come back when he knows. Have
a bit of a look. Yeah.
But he's probably one of the few characters that can afford to be a bit cryptic, because he is the ambassador to the War Master, isn't he? So
yeah,
he's safe for the time being, I would assume. He can play it up even to the guy who's supposedly in charge. But that was chapter 1. So now we move on to chapter 2.02. If my computer works, there we go.
Yeah.
And we'll go back to Dalia. Last we were with her was she'd run into the chamber where, or what's he called? The Jonas Milas was being torn apart by the Astronomicum.
He was all of the secrets of everything were being revealed from. The device was working as intended.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not as intended, but certainly it was working.
But they hadn't accounted for the actual amount of power that was coming through, and that's what went wrong. And everyone said, "Don't open that door," and she opened the door and went in. And we know what happened to her, because now she is unconscious, and although she's sort of unsure of her whereabouts, she's not dead, she's unconscious, and we're in her head, but she can't quite work out where she is. Is she in real time, or is she in a dream? She can't tell whether she's trapped in one place or if she's moving. And in her unconscious state, she's following these specks of light, but they keep disappearing. But she slowly but surely remembers who she is before she wakes up. Meanwhile, the rest of Mars is under attack from the warp-powered scrap code.
Yeah.
And it's like this scrap code is like a living being hunting its way through various ways that connect everything and corrupting everything as it goes. A few of the Forge Masters managed to detect this threat early enough to avoid complete disaster.
Trying to pull the plug.
Yeah. Although even the ones who saw it coming were not fast enough to remain unscathed. Various factories come under siege. Like one example that they gave is the assembly lines at Sinus Sabal, whose gigantic assembly lines had non-stop produced Lehman Russ battle tanks for hundreds of years, suddenly grinds to a halt, never to move again.
Yeah.
In the Tycho Brahe ammo storage facility that belongs to High Adept Jago, a rogue set of commands raised the temperature in the facility and caused the Promethean tanks to explode, sending liquid flame throughout the facility, detonating billions of tons of ammo and just wiping it off the face of the planet. So that must have just been, there must just be another crater somewhere in Mars.
This scrap code is really malicious, and it's not like, it isn't just about infecting things. It's a bit more than that. It's really just like fucking shit up.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the most scientific way of putting it. And it's like, this is going on like everywhere, destroying technology. So like that place is creating the Lehman Russ tanks. That's like the place Lehman Russ tanks have made.
Yeah.
Now it's gone. Like it's stopped. That's it. Technology is being erased. It's like everything this touches is just unrecoverable. And then with it overnight, it says like over 900,000 people were dead. And then the scrap code, once it's had its fun with technology, turns its sights on the astropaths on the planet, seeping into like hydrogen cyanide gas that fuels the life supports. And in like one instance, 6,000 astropaths on the planet died with a combined psychic scream that was even felt in the Emperor's vaults of terror. And with their death, Mars fell silent to the outside or any other planet. Polvan Maximal, he was one of the few able to disengage his forge, but 3 of his fusion reactors suffered prior critical meltdowns, exploding and poisoning the soil for thousands of kilometers around. And they set off chain reactions across Mars, and then within minutes, millions more had died. And this would eventually be called the night known as the Death of Innocence on Mars. And the only forge that had been completely untouched was the forge of Adept Zeth, and we wonder why.
It's definitely a way to draw a target on your back.
Oh yeah, and that's why she's the enemy. So nothing about the way she'd built or designed her forge had contributed. However, the scrap code was unable to travel through this glittering golden wires, which had just been touched by the Emperor's light. And now her forge remains the only ray of hope in the new darkness. And Dalia wakes up and she's in the medical chamber as Gandalf standing over. Oh, sorry, wrong movie.
Gandalf.
So she wakes up and basically instantly she's questioned for 5 hours by Zeth, who just wants to know everything what happened. What did she see? What did she do?
Yeah.
Until her friends were finally given access to come to her. Zooch tells her, like, you gave us a real scare, and she apologized and said she didn't mean to. And he laughs at her and says, you opened a door to a room full of psychic energy, but you didn't mean to.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I think that's a fair comment.
Yeah, I'm glad someone called her out.
Yeah.
And she says, like, she couldn't leave Jonas to die in there, and the others like can't sort of meet her eyes. And it turns out that not a single trace of him was found after the incident. And along with Jonas, all the psychers had died. And all of this little team that works together actually really are affected. They all feel like
in a different way, aren't they? They're all carrying their guilt.
Yeah, they're like they've obviously Dalia in one way was a bit lucky. She got knocked out, but they actually had to watch everyone die, and we don't know how long it has passed. But obviously they're dealing with the clear up now.
Yes,
which must have been messy.
Pretty grim. Pretty grim, you would imagine.
And they ask, like, what was Zeth asking her? You must be devastated. The machine's failed. And Azuya says to her, like, the machine didn't fail. It worked for a moment before completely overloading. And Dalia says, like, Zeth wants to know about Jonas's death and what he said. And Caxton says, well, what did he say? And she looks up at the pic screen, like the CCTV camera basically, and lies and says he just died.
Yeah.
So she gets out of the hospital, and the next 6 days they get back to work, rebuilding the Akashic reader. And after the previous oversight this time, everything is checked and double checked, and every single aspect is examined and basically check where they could make any slight improvement. And like Zeth spends very little time with Dalia after this and is absent for most of the reconstruction, leaving her apprentice Polk to run things with Rumu 31 watching over them.
Yeah.
So it's a bit shady now. Like Zeth,
she's like kind of wandered off. She's looking at other things. Seems a bit sus. Obviously, Romu 31 is wheeled in again as a protector, someone to keep eyes on stuff, but it's like very hands off, as it seems that. Well, it seems shady, but actually, you'd think about it. Zeth has now got lots of other stuff to deal with, given that Mars is exploding. But Dalia doesn't necessarily know that.
No, I suppose I didn't think of that either. Yeah, she probably has. She's got a team working on it. She knows they're capable. You're right. She's probably got a lot of panicking elsewhere to do.
Yeah.
And that's all it leads on. So Dalia asks why Zeth's not more involved, and Romu simply says there's more important things to deal with. Oh, there you go. We should have waited 10 seconds. And
there you go. Yeah.
And Zeth says, like, she asked her a few more times about Jonas's final moments, but she doesn't change her answer. But she knows, looking at Zeth's aura, that she can see that she knew that she was lying. But something in the back of her mind is telling her not to trust Zeth with this new piece of knowledge.
Yeah.
Because after all, knowledge is power. And there's only a few people that she will trust with this information. And at the moment, Zeth is not one of them. The Akashic reader, a bit later, is nearly completed, although it will be months before Mars and Terra would be realigned. But there was still some power left over from the recent Astronomicon that had been harvested. And they were now already bringing in fresh psychers and reinstalling them into the coffers. But at this time, a new empath had not been located.
Yeah.
So while they're working, Dalia pops over to where Caxton and Zooch are working, using a very loud laser to cut through metal. And as she approaches, they turn it off and greet her. And she glances over to where Zeth is working nearby with Melissa.
Turn it back on.
Yeah, basically. And they say, why? She says, because I don't want her to hear me. And she's asked them about, I don't know how they do it. It must be shouting over this thing.
I think that's it. I think maybe old school techniques still exist, even in the Mechanicum.
Yeah. So how did this damper were used to block out the external interference? Would you be able to make a portable version of it? And Caxton sort of assumes, well, is it you want to block out vox feeds and pick screens and stuff like that, which I think to us is microphones and CCTV cameras.
CCTV, yeah, that's it.
And Zoot says he doesn't like the idea of secrecy. It won't end well. But she just says, I want to know if you can do it. And he says, of course I can. And she says, I want to talk to you all, but I need to be sure that no one is listening. I'm going to tell you the truth about what Jonas said to me. So obviously, it's going to get done.
Yeah.
Everyone loves gossip.
That's it. Yeah, exactly that.
Probably for no other reason, really. Just everyone needs to know. So they meet later on. They meet in the canteen. It's like a huge room filled with all the hungry workers gossiping about any little detail they have from the surface of Mars. And luckily for them, everyone's too preoccupied with what's happened on the planet to worry about them sitting in a corner having a chat.
Yeah.
So when they're ready, they turn the device on, and Dalia tells them, Jonas spoke to me, and everything he said made no sense. And sort of, they're all obviously a bit glum and a bit tired and shocked, but Severine suddenly snaps to attention, and she seems a bit shocked that Jonas spoke to her. And I think a bit later on, seems a bit jealous. So she gets a little bit whiny when anyone refers to him as the empath.
Yeah.
Keeps reminding me he had a name. She doesn't like it that they're just calling him empath because obviously they played a hand in killing him.
Yeah.
And eventually, like, they get round to it, and Dalia repeats every word for word what happened, and she tells him that she said that she was sorry for what happened, but he had told her that he didn't want her apology. He'd seen the truth. He's free. Tells her about the Dragon of Mars and the Grand Lie, and the Labyrinth of Night. And Caxton and Melisson have both heard of the Labyrinth of Night, and they call it the Noxus Labyrinth, which I think is a silly name.
It's very 40k.
Yeah,
it's very 40k. They could have just kept it as the Night Labyrinth, anything they like, but no, because it's 40k. It's kind of Latin, but not really. Like it's just
it's nonsense Latin,
space Latin.
Yeah. And they say like the Labyrinth of Night. It's a real place on Mars. It's a broken and desolate wasteland, and it's like famous for being a maze-like system of sheer deep walled valleys. And like years and years ago, a number of adepts tried to build their forges there, but everything they built failed, and eventually the area was abandoned. No one can account for why. Some unknown and unfixable technical issue. Lucas Crom's forge is to the south of it, and other than that, Zeth has the closest forge, but it's still a very long way away.
Yeah.
They then discuss the Dragon of Mars, and Dalia can only compare the meaning to like fables and stories, even from our time, about knights fighting dragons, stories that have been told from the dawn of man. And obviously there are hundreds of similar stories, but the premise is always the same. The hero seems to represent all-powerful a being, and the dragon always appears to be a force of chaos or evil. And the other thing that they have in common is no matter who wins, like how many times the dragon is defeated, it never truly dies. Its power or energy always seems to be used or harnessed to change or improve life for those left behind after it's killed.
Yeah.
But the message is the same. Good fights forever. Good and evil fight forever, and neither can truly die. As in defeat, one will always try to find its way back. And butting in, Melisson says, well, what's the point of going over these stories? And Dalia tells her that in her coma, she felt as if her mind and body became detached, and she actually became part of something else. And they say, well, you were just sort of blown up. Maybe it's a hallucination or a head injury. But she says, no, it's definitely something real. It's as if the Akashic reader linked her mind with some kind of old power or knowledge. And she believes that it may be something to do with the dragon that Jonas had spoke about. And she doesn't think it's dead, but it's somewhere beneath the surface of Mars. and she wants to find it.
Old? Is it a dragon? Is it really a dragon? Is it something else? What's the Emperor got to do with this?
Well, that's it.
All telling questions to come later.
Yeah, I know. It's weird to imagine that. I wonder if they're actually expected at this point. I know that they're all still getting their head around it, but she's obviously seen something. I wonder, like, does she actually think it's a dragon, like reptile or something else?
Yeah, I mean, that's it. Is the Dragon of Mars, like, you know, I mean, in the lore, there's loads of different bits and pieces about it. Was it just something symbolic? Was it something else? Was it an old Necron construct? Like, multiple different bits and pieces that it could actually be. That never really. I'm sure somewhere in the lore it's explained in a bit more detail. I've read different bits and pieces about it. No one knows for sure, but what we do know is that obviously the Emperor was involved. And that's what helped seal the pact between Mars and Terra. But obviously, as this book has dictated, and as we've heard, there's a lie somewhere in there.
Yeah.
There's something else going on. So what does that actually mean? And all of that is going to become clearer, if not answered. Certainly become clearer by the time we get to the end of the book.
Yeah. So, speaking of people waking up from comas, we go back, and he's not dead. We join Princess. I always say Princess. There's a P in there. Cavallero wakes up with a throbbing headache, struggling to open his eyes at all, as if he's been submerged underwater. Although around his body, the water feels thick and sticky. He's completely disorientated, but he can hear a voice, and he's trying to focus on it. And he can move, so he moves himself forward until his hands and face were pushed up against a thick pane of glass. The voice spoke up again, saying his name, and he tried to reply, but his mouth was full of fluid. After a few tries, he's actually able to speak, and the figure on the other side of the glass seems pleased. And another unseen figure tells him that he's glad to see him awake. And this figure tells him that he's in the Medicaid facility back at Ascrasus Mons.
Yep.
And the figure introduces herself as Agatha. And she's there to act as his aide or famulus to assist with his needs. And he says, well, why do I need a famulus? I'm not a cripple. And she said, maybe we should wait a while for you to recover before I tell you anything else. And he bangs his fist up against the glass and demands an answer, because he's the Storm Lord and he will have an answer. And she says, well, how much do you remember? And he relives his last waking moment as this monster machine from Legio Mortis is bearing down on him, and this agonizing pain as his own Victorus Magnus heart ruptured. And he remembered the death scream of his Magos Argi as he died with the machine, and then he fades to black.
Rough stuff.
Yeah. And like this agonizing pain hit him in the chest as he relived the experience, and he wept invisible tears inside the blood-flecked suspension fluid of his new amniotic tank. And that's the end of chapter 2.
Yeah, rough times for Princeps Cavallero. He's, as I said, experienced Titan death, and that has obviously, put him where he is now, which is floating around in. He's a goldfish, effectively.
Yeah, and that was the thing. Like before, when we first met him, it was like one of the conversations he had is that's something he never wanted to experience. He never wanted to end up in one of these.
Yeah. It's interesting as well, because it speaks to the development of the Imperium generally, because by the time we get 10,000 years in the future from this into 40k, obviously that's standard practice. Most princeps are amniotic in how they join with their machines and part of the machine. But back then, that was like the last resort.
Yeah, it's like when your body's given up. But it's almost like their version of being put into a dread, isn't it?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. No, you can still serve the Emperor even in death.
Yeah, that's it. Only in death does duty end, and in this instance, death means just being absolutely eradicated.
Yeah, I know. They just can't. I mean, I suppose though, because I know, like, obviously nothing really happened, so it would have been a bit of a horrible way for like their Stormlord to die of just having a heart attack because he ran a bit too far.
I mean, that's it. Because the only thing that happened to him was because he pushed the Titan too much.
Yeah.
But obviously, at the time he needed to do it because he's faced with, a challenge to their sovereignty. So he pushes it to the point that that's the way it goes. But yeah, it's a rough way of going out as like the noble knight that he sees himself as. So it's a bit of a rough one. But actually, as the story goes on, perhaps it's not the worst thing for him.
Oh no, definitely. Like we will see, won't we?
Indeed. Bit of foreshadowing.
Right, so chapter 2.03, and the jewel of the Northern Forges, Mondus Oculum, belonged to Cain. He had the most industrious weapon shop going, and only rivaled by the forges of Lucas Crom at the Mondus Gamma. But although Cain's was still far superior. Although all the forges of Mars were geared towards supplying troops for war, both Crom and Cain's specialties lied at the feet of the Astartes. Bolters, blades, battle plate, armored vehicles, you name it, they've got it. The weapons were not the only things honed at his forge. Astartes, deemed to have an affinity with the mysteries of technology, were permitted to study with the master adepts. So Cain himself had tutored some of the finest. Tekel of the Salamanders, Gebrin of the Iron Hands, and Polonin of the Ultramarines. The most valued and most industrious forge of Mars, owned by the second most powerful man on the planet, was one of the few to have avoided outright collapse. Over 3 weeks since the mysterious storms emerged over the forge of the Fabricator General, Cain was still trying to keep his forge running as usual, or as close as he could. The storms, even though they were hundreds of kilometers away, had even affected him. Thousands of his workers had turned to rioting, suicide, or murder. His security had not been able to squash the mini rebellion, and it had to run its course, leading to many factories and workshops being completely destroyed until the rioting wound itself down. Most of his outer factories had been taken down by a corrupt message running through the comm system, but luckily the damage was reduced with Cain's quick reflex of shutting it down completely. And luckily he was able to keep up and running because he had recently converted most of his systems to the Wi-Fi system.
Yeah, indeed.
So Cain turned to his assistant, Lachin, and said, will my systems be repaired soon? And is given an estimation back of between 6 and 30 rotations, which he's not pleased with, because obviously the Mechanicum are very precise, and 6 and 30 is quite a gap.
Yeah, and how, a rotation? I'm assuming it's the rotation of the planet, but
yeah,
maybe that's me reading into it too. Maybe that's too obvious.
I would, I mean, I would say it's the way they say a day, isn't it? A rotation of day. So yeah, I mean, between a week and 3 or 4 weeks, that's not ideal when you're potentially at war.
No, and you've got lots of stuff being ordered by angry superhuman soldiers.
Oh yeah, definitely. And like they're just having like trouble because like the code scrubbers can't seem to keep any infected system clean.
Yeah.
And every time they fix one, another default picks up. And he says to Cain, like, the source seems to be unknown, but appears to have spread outward from the Fabricator General's forge, suggesting that they were the first to be attacked. But Cain suggests maybe that's where it was released from, but he regrets saying that out loud. His suspicions had been growing as he'd not had any communication from the Fabricator following these attacks, and obviously being number 2, you'd expect to hear from number 1 when the planet's in disarray.
Yep, absolutely.
All the Vox systems had been shut down to prevent infection. Off-world comms were impossible because of a strange psychic backwash, and Cain could only communicate now with Zeth and Maximal, thanks only to the noosphere. Neither of those had any good news to share. Maximal had lost 3 reactors and taken most of the damage. Zeth admitted to a failed experiment, resulting in the death of all of her psychers, and Kane assumed that the psychic backlash was due to this. And to make matters worse, before the shutdown, Maximal had received some data speaking of a mass disaster on the Istavan system.
Yeah, it's begun.
Oh dear. At least, and that's a good thing, because now we're sort of lined up with some of the earlier books. We know where we stand.
Yeah, timeline-wise, it's pretty clear now.
Yeah. But for those on Mars, details were still sketchy and not confirmed. But it was believed that the 3rd planet of Istavan was now an ashen wasteland. Kane knew only one weapon could do that, but could not fathom why the War Master would unleash a life eater virus on a planet, unless it was a desperate attempt to defeat an impossible foe. But all that was known from this was the Astartes had taken a horrendous number of casualties. Between the 3 Forge Masters, they were trying to restore order and to avoid a secondary attack, whether it be digital or physical. Maximal's comm system was the least damaged, so he was working on that, while Zeth had sent envoys to the Titan legions. Kane didn't really like Maximal, although he appeared to be loyal. He had expressed too much fear and unsurety as what to do next, and Kane didn't think that this guy would ever achieve any real greatness, but he actually respected Zeth. She was an innovator and learned from the past rather than copied it as Maximal. Yeah. And with that thought, he took Lachine and they went back to work. Elsewhere, the Iquitus Bellum was back up and running with Maven at the helm, and he was out back on patrol, followed by his friend Kronos and his knight Pax Mortis through the trench of the west of Arzia Mons. Maven was having difficulty because the Bellum felt skittish, as if it was trying to resist him in everything. Seeing him struggling, Kronos said, "How are you getting along?" And Maven tells him that it's pulling away, as if it's trying to guide him. It still wants to find the thing that hurt them, but that is not their mission today. So again, like the Titans and like these knights, they're just we've sort of touched on it. They just have their minds of their own. These war machines. And even though it's like been fixed up, it's still not fixed. If
anything, it's more skittish. They do not seem the most optimal way of waging war.
Not at all. Anyway, so the current mission, the Knights of Tyrannus, they'd also been hit by this disastrous attack across Mars, but they'd fared a lot better than others, but they were still not unscathed. Luckily, they were allies of Zeth, and they were also on the Wi-Fi, but a shred of scrap code had breached their libraries, wiping out thousands of years of data, including the full honor roll of this ancient house, which is probably quite savage, like considering how proud they are. And
it's probably worse than anything else, right? That's the bit that's going to sting them the most.
Yeah, I know. Like I always imagine like they'd have it engraved in the walls somewhere, but if they had it all converted over to digital, they're screwed, aren't they?
Yeah, indeed. It sounds like that's the way they've done it. Which, again, it doesn't strike me as some standard way the Imperium would do it. You would imagine it'd be carved into some sort of statue or memorial of some description.
I mean, unless they had it written down, and maybe, we're thinking it's wiped out. Maybe it was a fire started.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, just raised it to the ground.
Yeah. Either way, so that's all gone. And the scrap code had also tried to discharge their main coolant reactor, but luckily they were quick enough to shut it down and prevented their own nuclear holocaust. And obviously survived, but it didn't machine. What that meant was any machine that wasn't already charged up and ready to go will not be able to move now until the coolant machine is repaired. So now they're not going to be at full strength. And following that, the house has been ordered to march and assist in the defense of Zeth's Magma City. Because they were now low on numbers, instead of riding the usual threes, they were now patrolling in pairs, Old Stator had been dispatched with Brother Gentrin, who had just been recently elevated into his position. Maven and Kronos patrolled almost continuously, only stopping to recharge and refuel their mounts. As they pressed on, Maven felt the struggle to stay in control increasing, feeling a pain in his head, as if the knight was forcibly trying to disconnect from him. Suddenly, a familiar image flashed across his visor, and he halted the knight. Feeling his headache subside as he did so, he called out to Kronos, telling him to halt. He sent the image over to Kronos, saying, "This is what I saw before we were attacked last time." And Kronos looks and says, "There's nothing there." And Maven argues with him, saying, "Look, the Bellum senses it.
Yeah.
It's like a gut feeling that I trust, and I'm going to follow the machine's instinct and hunt down what attacked me." And Kronos says, "You'll lose your spurs. Basically, you're going to get fired if you do this." And Maven says he doesn't care. "I need to do it so the Bellum can finally have closure, and maybe it will stop misbehaving." And as a good friend, Kronos gives in and agrees to go with him.
Sloppy discipline here. Like, this is not what you need at a time of war.
I mean, anywhere else in the Imperium, he would have been shot in the back of the head.
Yeah, that's it. Like the other warhound would have just turned on him and gunned him down.
Yeah, and it would have been, sorry, he malfunctioned.
Heretic.
Yeah. And they'd have believed him too when he went back. Or they might not have cared. A lot of people don't seem to care.
Well, they would have just looked at the data logs and gone, "Oh yeah, look at that, he did do that," and that would have been that.
On the flip side of it, like Kronos, obviously he rides the same thing, so he must know how it works. And if the things are playing up, they're for a reason, I guess.
I suppose so. I mean,
you're bloodthirsty, Shane.
I'm not the one going off mission.
Well, all right, fair enough. So we'll end this chapter with Dalia, who was asleep. She wakes up with a scream, sensing something moving in the darkness and hearing the hiss of a dragon breathe and something say her name. Even with her eyes shut, she can see this outline of a hooded man with a mark of dragon under his skin. Caxton was woken by the disturbance, turned on the lights, and Dalia opened her eyes and could see that the things that had woken her weren't there. After waking from her coma, Dalia had found that she couldn't bear to be alone and had developed a fear of the dark, a strange feeling that something was trying to pull her further in for eternity and she would never be able to escape. She told Caxton this a while ago, so he moved in with her. Although she felt there may be an ulterior motive on his part.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. As they sit up together in bed, and Caxton puts his arm around her, and she tells him that it was the same dream that she keeps having. And he asks, "Well, what does that mean?" And she says, "It means it's time to leave." And he says, "Look, we'll go with you. I'll go wake the others. Let's get going." And she sees the determination in him and gives him a kiss, and they prepare to leave.
Noble Caxton.
Scared of the dark, are you?
Yeah.
I know how to solve that.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah.
Oh dear. But yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Do you want to do another chapter or?
What
we are.
No, we could do another one.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And that brings us into chapter 2.04. So Dalia and the rest of the group make their way through the Magma City, hoping to remain unnoticed amongst the never-ending flow of workers. They're all nervous. They've left the forge without permission, and now as members of the cult Mechanicum, they have a lot to lose if they're discovered. Severine mentions it being a very bad idea, and Caxton snaps at her, saying that she didn't have to come, but she says that she needed to, without any further explanation as to why. Dalia tells them they do need to do it. They've unlocked something by using the Akashic Reader, and we need to find out what it is. And Zooch corrects her and says, "We don't, you do. I'm quite happy not knowing." And Dalia says, "Well, why did you come?" And he simply says, "Because you asked for my help." So loyal friends. And they all now make an effort to move with confidence, hide the fact they're trying to avoid being seen, and they're definitely trying to avoid protectors.
Yes.
Dalia is very grateful that her friends have come, Their skills will all be useful, but more than anything, it's being alone that she can't handle. Caxton's come, clearly because he's in love with her.
Of course, yeah.
Yep.
Good old noble Caxton.
Zooch has come because he said he would, and that's what he's going to do.
Yep, fair play.
And Dalia suspects that Severine has only come out of guilt because of what happened to Jonas.
Probably. I think she's probably nailed that. All free for free.
Yeah. And Melisson was the only one who hasn't come with them. There's no hard feelings or malice. Melisson had told them someone needed to carry on and finish what they'd started, and she was simply too old to go on an adventure, although she did want to. To get out of the city, they needed to use the maglev, which is basically a train, and it's basically the subway below the city. They move through the flow of workers towards the platform, and Dalia is desperately trying to avoid sights of the protectors who are policing the traffic flow. Zooch is leading them through the crowds to the correct platform, which feels like a massive maze, and a box of Vox comes over the air, but no one catches what it said over the noise. As they're trying to work out what was said, a voice says, "It said the next maglev will be delayed by 275 seconds. Dalia flinches as she recognizes the voice and turns to see Romu 31 standing behind them. Not what she wanted to see.
Yes, although that's not what she wanted to see. But maybe she doesn't have the full context at this point.
Not yet, we don't. And we're not going to get it for a minute.
No.
Cavallero, what was that? Cavallero watches as the enemy Reaver he just killed falls backwards. A hole burnt clean through the center of it, and he revels knowing it was dead before it hit the ground. He's back on the battlefield. He feels alive again, especially standing over a downed enemy. But he also has the knowledge that the second enemy Reaver is hunting him. He can feel the heat in his arm as his blast gun reheats and the vibrations in the other as his mega bolter reloads, ready for his next attack. Data floods his mind and he's given full battle awareness in the speed of a thought. As he's giving orders, an enemy warhound appears, smashing through nearby buildings to get at him. The warhound fires at him, but luckily his shields hold off the worst of the impacts. In quick response, he fires a storm of explosive rounds back at it, staggering the warhound back against the buildings as Cavallero closes in. He detects the enemy Reaver is now closing in at around 600 meters, and although they're no match for the Warlord, if they work together, they could get the better of him. And he closes down the Warhound, fires his mega bolter straight at it as he feels the carapace mounted missiles firing off, knowing that the Reaver joined the fight and his crew had automatically fired first. The Warhound was now injured, but still defiant, firing at him, weakening his shields. He ignored the pleas of his crew to fire on the Reaver and finished the Warhound with another volley from the Mega Bolter, killing it, this time splitting open its carapace, engulfing its innards with flames. Suddenly, he was himself engulfed in immense pain. The Reaver stood off to his flank, its plasma gun still smoking from the shot fired, hitting Cavallero. Another barrage of rockets hits him. The panels inside his control panel exploding in flame, killing some of the crew. Knowing that it's too late, he fires off all his rockets back at the Reaver. Both the Warlord Titan and the Reaver, exposed and now without shields, face each other. Cavallero grinned and fired the full power of his blast gun into the Reaver's face.
Straight in, point back range.
Yeah. And Agatha watched the battle unfold on the holographic projection table, admiring the skills of the Stormlord, even as he was destroyed. So if you got your hopes up thinking that he was back on the battlefield, that was just a simulation. And he's being monitored, although everyone's quite happy with his progress. Princess Sharik is watching along with Vlad Suzik and Jan Mordant, who all acknowledge that the Stormlord is definitely getting better. But Suzak doesn't think it's enough, and they argue between themselves about his performance. Was he killed because he's not ready? Was he acting recklessly because he knew he was in a simulation? Can they take that risk with him in a real Titan? Mordant argues that despite dying, he did manage to take out 3 enemies single-handed. But Sharek says that he did at the expense of his crew, and a Warlord Titan and Commander should know better.
Yeah.
Which is probably the first time that we've seen anybody in command care about the deaths of a crew. Normally,
this is true. Yeah, this is true. Normally, it's not really a factor that people care about too much. It's very much the Princept is the star of the show, and everyone else is kind of ancillary to it. It's not really something that's important to them.
No.
But in this instance, he has sort of mentioned that, actually, what does he say? He says about that the commander's duty is not only to win the battle, but it's also to bring everyone back home again.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is very un-Imperium.
Yeah, and in the very few glimpses we've had inside Titans before, that's not. No one cares. You have crew blowing up all over the place, and the guy in charge is always the last one to go, and you have it's like when you watch Star Trek and random controls explode and the red shirts go flying.
Red shirts die first.
Yeah. But yeah, someone's written in that they care. Maybe that's the only way they can get people to apply for the job. We'll get you home. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely get you home.
Yeah.
It may be in a wet sack, but we'll get you home.
Oh, yeah. Well, not all of you. Some of you.
Yeah. The identifiable parts of you will be returned.
And if not, then you won't be remembered.
No. You're menial enough that no one cared in the first place.
So, yeah, obviously the concern here is that the Stormlord's not taking on his duties seriously at the minute, and not taking on the safety of his crew. No. So based on this random act of kindness, they decide that until he's fit to take back command, Sharek will take command of the Legio. The others all agree, and Agathe flinches, hoping that the Stormlord can't hear what's being said.
Yeah.
The amniotic tank.
It might be too much for him, losing his Titan and his Legio. But he's not really losing it, but he probably wouldn't see it that way.
Yeah. And it's only for a little while.
Yeah.
It'll all work out. They got to get him back on his feet. He needs to focus on his battle skills before he can worry about anything else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dalia, a little bit of heartbreak for the moment at the sight of Roman 31, and it's not just the odd smell of oil and rotten meat that is upsetting her, because obviously that's what he smells like, because his fleshy parts are still dying, which is
real rough. Yeah. Mental picture there. Not one, you've got to really not care about yourself at that point.
It's a really hard way to make friends as well, surely. When you just reek.
It feels a bit Death Guardy, if I'm honest.
Feels good.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, but right up your street, but not. There's so much, not hypocrisy, but the line, we say good guys and bad guys. The line between the two is very, very thin, grey, muddled. Because if you were doing that Death Guard green, you'd be called a heretic. But if you're doing it for the Omnissiah, that's cool.
Well, yeah, that's it. But he's more robot, isn't he? It's like he's going above and beyond to prove that flesh is weak by just letting it fall off of his body.
That's a tough sell. I'm sorry.
They must leave a trail, surely.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Oh, horrible. Anyway, we'll leave you with that image. Dalia can't manage to say anything more than hello until Zooch manages to step up and tries to make an excuse for them being there, basically lying and saying they've come out of their way to scout a new delivery route for supplies to try and make things faster. And everyone else jumps on and tries to expand this lie, just making it worse until...
It's very, very weak. It's a very weak lie.
Yeah. And Dalia, actually, she's so embarrassed that she sort of wishes that the floor would open up and she just fall into lava because the others are embarrassing her. And eventually she just shouts over them and tells him the truth. we're going to the Noxus Labyrinth, and Romu31 says, well, why would you want to go there? Nothing good can come of it. Only the cult of the dragon is said to dwell there. And this only reinforces Dalia's need to go now, because obviously Romu's told her there's a cult of the dragon. So
she's having dreams about dragons.
Yeah. I was right.
Yeah. Suddenly it's like, oh, there's only the cult of the totally unrelated dragon that lives there. And it's like, oh, really?
What a coincidence.
Now you mention it. Fair enough.
Yeah. So she says, like, no, we're going. What do you know? And he says that when the adepts tried to settle there and all the settlements failed, not everyone left. A cult of madmen remained behind. And she said, I don't know why, but I do need to go there. And Romu says, are you sure about that? And she's surprised because she's expected to be stopped. And he says, look, actually, now you're going. I have to come with you.
Yep.
Zooch is confused and says that they're traveling without Zeth's sanction. So surely you should be dragging us back to her. And Romu says that the mission is to keep Dalia safe, not restrict her movement, which is even more confusing for the group. And he says, look, the planet is in turmoil, and the information that's common in the Forge is only a small percentage of how bad things really are in the wider planet. The terror of Old Night threatens to return, and he believes Dalia is the key to salvation. She may not know it, but he believes in her. And Dalia thanks him and says, I don't need your thanks. I'm your protector. That's what I'm going to do. So she thanks him anyway, and they head to the maglev. Zeth stands in a tower reading through the streams of data coming in, mostly from Kane and Maximal, but others from more desperate sources who had survived in the death of innocents and were seeking help. Melisine stood beside her, and Zeth told her that Romu had found them and would keep them as safe as he could, although they're now on a dangerous path. She ordered Melisine to delete any knowledge of Dalia's destination from her memory banks, to go back to work. I'm now expecting a visit from the ambassador, Melgator. And that ends that chapter.
And a good halfway point, like just over halfway through this part. Yep. Definitely moving quicker than part one. And a lot happening, like the fallout of just the chaos above is quite interesting to read from their point of view. Yeah. It's a shame. Like I said, it's a shame about the Stormlord, but maybe not. He actually seems to be enjoying himself. Like,
yeah.
So that's cool. But obviously, there's more afoot at the moment, and we can't work out, or the feelings about Zeth bounce from good to bad, because she's like, to begin with, she's has she got sinister, different meanings? What's going on? But then actually, she's like, no, Dalia's got to go and do this, whatever that happens to be, and send someone out to protect her all the time. So it's a bit of a strange one.
Well, that's it, isn't it? It's like, and that's the thing. Like, Melison's clearly, I don't know if the word's betrayed, but she's obviously gone and told Zeth what's going on. Zeth sent Romu to protect. So she's obviously not shady, but she knows, like, we know the reason that Dalia was saved is because there's something going on with her. She's got this ability that no one else has. So clearly, like, dragging her back and holding her prisoner is not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
She's made up her mind. Zeth knows that something's happened with Jonas Milas. So why not let it play out? Because keeping her there is not going to help. And also, Melgator's coming, and she knows that keeping people around of value she's probably safer out in the wastelands than she is there.
Yeah, definitely. Old Melgator is not a good dude. No,
I mean, well, he works for the Dark Mechanicum, so how do you know? He might be a really nice guy. It's just
it's another one of those things. It's not a name that strikes good guy. Melgator of the Dark Mechanicum doesn't say good guy to me.
No, exactly. You're not going to buy anything off him, are you?
No, no, definitely not. Well, no, not unless you're after, something shady.
Well, do you want to wear a death mask and be covered in spikes? Does that appeal to you?
Some people would go for it.
Yeah.
Right? It depends how much they don't like the Emperor, I suppose.
I guess so. But yeah, I like that. We're really ramping up now to War on Mars. I think we get through the rest of part 2, and I'm pretty sure when we get into part 3, that's when it's all like it's just hell for leather.
Yeah, really goes through. It'll be interesting to see that as well, because it's been a while since I read or listened to it the first time round. And I remember last time when I listened to it that first time round, I remember the last part going by really quickly. So it's going to be interesting to read or listen through it again and then talk about it, because as I said, it's a massive. I remember when we first both read it or talked about it. It's a massive change of pace, this book, in that it's quite dense.
Yeah,
like the wording, everything they talk about, the way they talk. It's a total change of thinking when you've actually got to absorb it, because it's just a denser book. Whereas the marine-led books, especially at where we're up to now, you kind of got used to, how Marines are, how they function, how they're built, how their legions work, because it's legions at this point. All of that makes sense. This is entirely new to us as readers, so it's definitely a change of pace.
And that's why I think the first part we ended up doing in 3 chunks, because it was just so much to re-explore and figure out.
Yeah, but once you get used to that, then your head's in gear, as it were. And then part 2 and 3 tend to whistle by.
Yeah, cool. Well, unless you've got any other bits to add for this part, we'll wrap it up, I think.
No, I think that's it. I think, as I said, it's good progress made through part 2. Looking forward to finishing part 2 off. Yeah,
me too. So if you're listening to us on Spotify and you want to see what we look like, I don't know why you would, come over to YouTube. We've got this and some other stuff going on. We're on Instagram, where we obviously paint all our models and do other bits and pieces, and we've started doing painting competitions that Tommy's running, so go and check those out and get involved, because they've been the one we've done has been really good fun. I think by the time this comes out, there'll be a second one on Tom's page. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, so at Iron and Ceramite, Twitch, Patreon, same thing. Element Games, the link will be in the description of the video. When you buy your hobby stuff next, use our link if you want to support the channel. You get your hobby supplies discounted, and then at no extra cost to you, we get a little bit of a kickback, and we will put any money we get back into the channel, improving those battle reports that we're making. And I don't even know if you're playing combat cards still.
I am. I was playing it long before anyone else. Other than Glenn, and at that point we didn't know we were both playing it. But me and him, the addicts of the group, very much addicted to it. Always tussling for first place on the group. Glenn has actually, as of recording, had a storming start to this particular month's worth of games, but I'm pleased to say that I'm currently topping the table again, but it's hard going. It's back and forth at the moment. So we've got a very active group at the moment. Actually, we're fully subscribed, 50 of 50 in the clan. So if you are interested in joining, do always look us up, and if there is room, jump on it, because as I said, it is a particularly full clan at the moment. But if you can get in, have a go and see whether you can topple us on the leaderboard.
I'm gonna have to earn my place and start playing it again, I think.
Well, I was going to say there's a lot of active people on there at the moment. Not a lot of new players at the moment as well. So
no one will notice me creeping back in them.
They won't. No, you'll be fine.
I guess I'm not sleeping tonight then. All right, well, let's say goodbye, and we'll see you on the next one.
Cheers. Bye.
As always, we would like to thank you for listening to our Iron and Ceramite podcast. If you liked us, then you can also find us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and any other good podcast services. Just remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.